It's episode 557 of the Locked On Texas Rangers podcast. On today's episode, I'm breaking down five Rangers that need big spring trainings to get on with their season, a few guys who are impressing in the minor leagues, all that and more coming up on this episode of Locked On Rangers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On to the Texas Rangers. I'm your host, Brice Paterik, here today, entering my 3-year anniversary with the Locked On Network, heading to my 4th season with the Rangers. The first time the Rangers actually have a competitive team for me. I want to thank you guys so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. If you're not already, go ahead and follow me on Twitter at Brice Paterik, follow the show at Locked On Rangers, and subscribe on YouTube, where we have cleared 600 subscribers. My new goal is 700 by opening day. It's going to be really a whole lot to get there, but I think we can do it. But if you're not already subscribed on YouTube, go ahead and do that, or wherever you get your podcast. On today's show, this week I've been talking with Grant, who has been eyes on the ground, boots on the ground, I guess more boots on the ground than eyes on the ground at spring training. The last couple of days worth of episodes, we talked for an hour, split it into 2 episodes. Really great in-depth stuff on some lower level farm guys, and some really great insight from him and his prospect brain and baseball evaluation brain. Lots of great stuff there. And tomorrow's episode, I'm going to be making my first opening day roster projection. There will be 28 spots that I'll be getting into. But on today's show, I'm getting into 5 guys who really need to have big spring trainings, or at least show a lot of market improvement for their future with the Texas Rangers. But first, I want to get into some guys who really deserve a shout out. Some minor league guys who it is early, and it does feel a little soon to evaluate guys. And evaluating guys on spring training numbers is always sketchy, especially this year. But we're going with what we have to go on. We're literally 2 weeks away from opening day. I don't know if you realize this, because it kind of snuck up on me too. But this thing is getting into gear really quickly. It is a shortened camp. It's not the 3 weeks like I thought we might get. It's a little bit longer than that, but still, normally spring training is, a month and a half-ish of games? Not quite a full 2 months, but still, it's a lot of time to evaluate guys. We'd be having some games in early February, starting the season. Well, I guess we're starting about a week or so, week and a half, maybe 2 weeks later than it normally would. But still, there's not a whole lot of time to evaluate these guys. And some of these guys, they're in some precarious spots on the Rangers, and their status on the roster may be in question. Some of them, long-term, not so much. There isn't as much a question, but it's really just that they need to prove themselves this year because things haven't gone well for them. But I want to give some shout-out to some guys who have already done very well and impressed me a little bit more than I thought they would. Josh H. Smith, or just Josh Smith, is a guy who is one of the primary pieces, if not the primary piece, in the Joey Gallo trade. He's a shortstop, also plays some third base and second base, and I wasn't super high on him coming over. I thought he was fine. He didn't have any crazy impressive numbers, like pretty solid numbers for the Rangers. 9 games in Hickory where he had a OPS literally 1 point below 800. And then he did pretty well in 30 games, 127 plate appearances for Frisco. A 425 on base, which is solid. 431 slugging percentage, which is okay. Not as much as I thought. Thought he's more of a bat-first kind of guy. I wasn't sure how legit his glove was at shortstop. But he's made some really good plays defensively at shortstop, some really good effort plays. The bat is loud. His bat-to-ball speed is great. He's got some real power in there, and he's got a pretty good advanced approach at the plate with the left-handed swing. And he plays a legit shortstop. I think could be a legit big league shortstop. Not an elite defensive one, but I think he could play there, and I think his bat would definitely carry there. And, I think part of it was my own bias of being completely blinded by the rage and fury of trading Joey Gallo that, it would have taken basically a Wander Franco to make me, less furious with the return. But it was a solid return for Joey. I think it still could have been better, but I think it was solid. These guys in Smith and Ezekiel Duran, not so much some of the other guys. I mean, Glenn Otto, I think, is going to be a bullpen arm for a while. I don't think he's a starter. And Duran really came on towards the back half in the fall league last year. But Smith really impressed me in these first couple of games. Another guy who's really impressed me with his bat, a guy who I was kind of questioning when the Rangers drafted him. That's right, it was Davis Wenzel, because he was drafted right after Josh Young. Another guy who had a similar profile, but a little bit, less impressive. He played primarily third base. I didn't think he'd have the positional flexibility that he does have. He plays a legit shortstop, a legit third, first, and literally anywhere they need him outside of catcher. I think he's pretty much played there, or I think has the ability to do so. He's a first-round pick, 41st overall in 2019. Davis Wendzel has shown that he is probably going to be a big leaguer, have a pretty long big league career, in my opinion. Last year in Frisco, the bat wasn't as impressive. 738 OPS. It was fine. The 348 on base, that's about what you expect from him. He's got a really good advanced approach. He walks a whole lot. But the power, I really wanted to see a little bit more power there. And if he can show a little bit more power, I mean, that takes him from a guy who's probably going to be a bench utility guy and have a long, decent career to a guy who could be an at least average starter on a big league team. And, you know, with some of the stuff he's done very early on, it is like 3 games or whatever that we're talking about. But he's really impressed with his bat and had a couple of moonshots. One was a little bit wind aided, but he has put the bat on the ball really well early. He's got a 1346 OPS in, albeit 14 plate appearances, so literally nothing. But a couple of doubles, a home run, batting 460, on base of 500. Like the guy's done well in a couple of outings at third, second, and shortstop. So I wouldn't be surprised if he cracked the roster by the end of the year, if he forces Charlie Culberson out of a roster spot. I don't think he's going to out of spring training, but I don't think the idea can be dismissed out of hand. This guy is going to play a part for the Rangers in the future, whether that's as a starter, I don't know, but I think he's going to be on this Rangers roster for quite a while. And it's not like Charlie Culberson, blew the doors off last year. A 676 OPS at the big league level, just 5 home runs in 90 games and 271 plate appearances. Like, he was fine, but he's mostly there for his glove and on a bad team. But I think Wendzel could be a quality offensive or a quality defensively versatile, okay bat kind of guy that can round out your bench and play a big part for a team for the foreseeable future. But those are the main guys that I wanted to shout out. Also, I love Cole Winn, and we talked about a whole bunch of these other guys, but those are the guys I don't think we talked about yesterday or the day before that with Grant that I think are worthy. I think we even talked about Josh H. Smith a little bit, but really I think that's a guy who is going to have a big year. He could end up playing some outfield to hopefully give him some positional versatility, because I do think he is a legit shortstop, but I think his bat is good enough to play in a corner outfield kind of place. Obviously, the value is much higher at shortstop, but again, the Rangers have their middle infield locked up for the next 8 to 10 years, so I don't think that his glove is going to be that much better that it's going to really force a whole lot of reconstruction in Josh Young going somewhere and Corey Seager being moved to third base. But I like him. I think he's a good player, and I think the Rangers got a pretty decent haul for Joey Gallo, and hopefully can end up bringing him back in free agency. Or not, even if they don't, this is still a really, really decent haul. But coming up, I'm going to get into the 4 players who really, really need to have a big spring training, or there's going to be some real long-term questions about what they can do on this Texas Rangers roster. But first, this episode is brought to you by BetOnline. That's right, BetOnline is here. It's that time of year, college basketball season. That's right, I'm wearing my Texas Tech shirt. The Red Raiders play Duke and hopefully can end Coach K's career tonight in the Sweet 16 if you want to put some money on, if you're feeling good about it. The Red Raiders are actually a 1-point favorite, so if you want to go and check that out, you can go to betonline.net and check out all of your sports betting needs. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. There's also some Rangers odds that are on there right now. To make the playoffs, the Rangers are a plus 600 or 6-1 odds. To miss the playoffs, they are a minus 1,000 or 1-10 odds. So basically what that means is that they think the Rangers have a 90.9% chance of not making the playoffs. If you're feeling differently, if you think this team is spunky enough to go ahead and make the playoffs, slip in there at the very end of a wild card spot, I don't think those are bad odds if you want to go bet on it at betonline.net, where the game starts. Now, this is your first listen of the day. If you want to make your second listen of the day, MLB Prospects host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. He is a fantastic host, a great show if you want to check out some more prospects coverage from around the nation. It's free and available everywhere you get your podcasts. Now, let's get into these 5 players. There are 5 players, count them 5. Yes, I can count to 5, I think, most days, that I think need to have a big spring training. Some of them need to have bigger ones than others. Some of them need to have a big spring training to make the Major League roster, as opposed to spending another year in the minors. And some of them just are basically fighting for their future with the Texas Rangers. Number 1, who I think needs to have a big... this is just 5. They're not in any order. This is just who I'm starting with. But Spencer Howard, I think, needs to really have a big spring training. He needed to have a bigger fall, bigger offseason. Levi Weaver in The Athletic wrote a big piece about him and how he needed to have a big offseason, what he was doing wrong, what was going wrong with the Phillies, what was going wrong when he came over to the Rangers, what he needs to do now, and how he's feeling. And he talked to Chris Woodward. Chris Woodward said that he looks like a man that's unverted. He looked at both of the different ways that he was trying to grow as a pitcher last year with the Phillies, and then a different way with the Rangers, and both of them were bad. And trying to work on the things that he was working on at the end of the season with the Rangers, he said, was like polishing a turd. He said that actually towards the end of the last season. But he still did say it, and it's kind of funny quote, and kind of goes to show how poor a place he was in. But last year was bad for him. There's no sugarcoating it. He's a former top 100 prospect, top 30, I think top 27. 27 was the highest that he was on any list I think about a year ago, which was with MLB.com. But last year with the Rangers, 8 games, 8 of those were starts, 21 and a third inning, so well under 3 innings per start, a 9.70 ERA. Had a problem with home runs, 5 home runs, walked 10, so walking 1 basically every other inning. Did strike out about a batter per inning. That was pretty much the only thing that went well for him. I mean, filling independent pitching numbers would have been horrendous if not for those strikeout numbers, but he was splitting the difference with Philadelphia between being a long-inning reliever, a multi-inning reliever that would be a dominant one, or a starter. The Rangers, they were trying to get him back up to speed as a starter, kind of work on his arm delivery. He's still working on that. It's still a work in progress. He says he does feel a lot better, feels a lot more natural, trying to find his natural arm slot, which has been a little bit of a challenge, but he is the only return in the Kyle Gibson piece. The Rangers traded a legit all-star starter, a starting pitcher, for a year and a half of control to Philadelphia, along with a closer who was among the best in baseball at the time. It kind of fell off a little bit towards the back half with Philadelphia. But they also traded one of the prospects of their own, a guy who was pretty close and has made his major league debut, which was kind of a curious part of that deal. But that just speaks to how highly they think of Spencer Howard. His long-term upside is a potential number 2 in the rotation. He is still pretty young. He was just 24 last year. It's easy to think because he'd been up for, well, it's literally just been 2 years. He's pitched in 6 games, under 25 innings in 2020, and this year was his second year of any big league action. But he's been on the radar, and there's a little bit of prospect fatigue that can come with that, which, again, he was drafted out of college as a second-round pick, so he hasn't really been on the radar that much, but it was just he was so close and will they, won't they kind of thing. That was a little frustrating for Phillies fans and for a Phillies organization that is not in the same spot as the Rangers that were really going for it. So they needed Spencer Howard. They couldn't decide what they wanted Spencer Howard to be. Right now, Baseball Reference has him projected at 85 big league innings this year with a 5.29 ERA, 2 saves, and 12 home runs. So they don't think that he is going to be much of a starter. They think he has more of a bullpen role this year. And I think the Rangers are going to pull him up to the big league level that it's going to be as a starter. Because right now, I have him penciled in. It's getting more pencily as the days go along as the Rangers' number 5 starter. I don't know how much that is going to be the case, but I mean the options behind him are Matt Moore, Colby Allard, A.J. Alexy, Glenn Otto. They're not sexy. They're not guys that are like, oh yeah, that's a big league starter. I mean, Colby Allard has been up and down. I think if it's not Howard at this point, it's got to be Allard, because I don't want to do the Matt Moore experiment. You don't want to throw out a guy who's going to go 4 or 5 innings and have a 6 ERA all year. Like, the Rangers are not that bad this year. I mean, maybe they are bad enough to have one of those guys, because they did have almost an entirely rotation filled with them last year. I guess just the first 2 that were eating up innings. But still, this is a big year for Spencer Howard, and I think that this is going to be really, really important to see how he does it. The next guy I have on my list is a guy who, he just needs a big year for him. He did have some major league offers. It came about, but he wanted to go sign for Texas and have a chance to make it out of spring training. There were some worse teams. He was drafted out of TCU, and I believe grew up in, Missouri City, Texas, which I believe is around the DFW area, if I'm not mistaken, at least in Texas. But he hasn't really done much so far, and he has really been on the decline the last 3 years. 2018 was the last year that he was really peak himself. It's kind of wild because he had his best offensive season, at least in terms of OPS. An 897 OPS, finished top 10 in MVP voting in 2018 as a 32-year-old. Had 42 doubles, 36 homers, and on base of 374. Was absolutely crushing it. The next year, more of an average kind of player. 129 games, OPS of 726, really fell off. Hadn't had an OPS that low basically his entire big league career, except for the 7 games he played in his first ever season in the major leagues in 2011. So he was technically a member of the 2011 Cardinals, which feels wrong. Which feels wrong to have. I mean, I know it worked with Lance Lynn, and we all like him, and he did well. But there's only so many 2011 Cardinals that you can sign. Lance Berkman, absolute curse. Matt Carpenter, it looks like, I don't know, but this guy really fell off last year. Was just absolutely terrible. Still played 130 games. I don't know how he played 130 games for the Cardinals, and they were still in the playoff hunt at the end of the year. I think they made the last wild card, if I'm remembering correctly, and did basically knock the Padres out. But played 130 games last year. But again, 249 plate appearances, which is absolutely wild. You can play that many games and average fewer than 2 plate appearances per game. Really doesn't make sense, but had a 581 OPS, an on base of 275, an on base of 305, slugged 275. Yeah, it was really rough for him last year. And so he worked with Joey Votto and his trainer in the offseason. Joey Votto is a guy who is really has been one of the premier hitters, had a couple of down years, but the last couple of years has really found his power swing almost more so than any other point in his career. So if there's a guy that you want to talk to about figuring out how to hit as an older guy, he's going to be 36 this year. That's the guy that I would want to go to. So I don't know. Maybe it's working. Maybe it's not. It's not looking like it is at this point. But again, it's like been 2 games that he's even played at the in spring training so far. So again, it's really, really hard to say so far at this point. And where we go, because he's listed as the first base DH guys. There we go. 1 game, 2 plate appearances, 0 for 2, no strikeouts. Yeah, literally not much we can do with that. I don't believe I saw those at bats, and if I did, they were not memorable. But he just needs to have a good year to get back on track, get at least one more big league season out of himself, betting on himself. It's just kind of wild how fast he fell off from his best season ever to where he is now with an OPS under 600 last year. Anyway, there's a couple more guys that I want to get into that I think their long-term future with the Rangers might be in more jeopardy than these guys. But we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about that. And we are back, and this is Locked On Rangers, breaking down the 5 guys who need to have the biggest spring trainings for the Texas Rangers. We've gone through Spencer Howard. We've gone through Matt Carpenter. Now we have a couple other guys. Nick Solak. Nick Solak is a guy who last year was just, there's no way to sugarcoat it. It was just really rough for him. He's a guy who the Rangers got with a decent amount of potential for a pretty decent reliever who came up out of nowhere, and the Rays just had room for this guy. If he doesn't work out, it's going to officially stamp my signal on the never ever trade with the Rays ever, unless they're giving you Wander Franco for $3, in which case really don't do that, because there's something up with Wander Franco. He might be about to steal your $3 back and then go to the Rays, because that doesn't make any sense. Anyway, this is a really rough guy, really rough year for this guy who could basically only hit fastballs, couldn't hit breaking stuff last year, had to spend some time in AAA, was basically given the second base job, Ruben Odor was kicked to the curb for him. Not that Ruben Odor didn't kick himself to the curb with his performance the last couple of years, but the job was wide open for Nick Solak, and he did not take advantage of it. He had a really good first month, but ended the season with a 677 OPS, 11 home runs in 127 games, 511 big league plate appearances. Went down to AAA for a month, came back, and was still just as bad, if not worse, towards the back end of the season. Hoping that the new hitting coaching staff can start to make some improvements on him, because he's a guy who's got a lot of offensive potential, does not really have a defensive position. He could stick there in left field. He could probably stick there in left field and or do a little bit of platooning, maybe with Cole Calhoun. But it seems like Cole Calhoun is probably going to be the starting right fielder. I didn't think he'd be locking up an everyday job at this point with his health and his age, but apparently it's looking like he's going to be the everyday right fielder, and then he's going to be trying to fight with Brad Miller for a spot, or maybe to platoon with Brad Miller at this point, because it's looking like Andy Ibanez is pretty much going to be the everyday starting third baseman at this point. we'll see how it goes. But Chris Woodward said he wanted to give his leeway. But Nick Solak is a guy who really needs to hit, and he has not hit at the big league level except for a really nice stint at his first 33 games with the Rangers, first 33 games in the big leagues in 2019. Had an 884 OPS in those 33 games in 2019. Kind of fell off in 2020. Was not great for him. Had an OPS below 700. Did so again last year. And this is kind of feeling like a last chance for him as a right-handed bat with no defensive position. And the one defensive position he played the most, the Rangers just signed Marcus Semien to an 8-year deal. So there's really not a whole lot of room for him here. I think the Rangers could be thinking about cutting bait. I don't think they're going to be too hesitant or too quick to do it because he still is so young. He's still got plenty of years left to control. And there is still that upside. I mean, he is going to be 27 this year. So he's nearing that. He's not really a young player anymore. He's nearing the, you need to figure it out now or you're not going to figure it out kind of stage, because there are some guys that are coming up that are along the way, like a Josh H. Smith or an Ezekiel Duran, that while they aren't outfielders right now, they'd probably be a better defensive outfielder than Nick Solak, and they've already shown that they can hit, and they can also have that defensive versatility to be a backup, shortstop or second baseman and do a little bit better and provide more value that way. So those guys are really pushing on the door. They're not going to be there in the middle of the season. Maybe towards the end of the season is when those two guys are going to be kind of knocking on the door. But again, Nick Solak really needs to hit, and he really needs to hit now. And at this point, he's done all right in spring training so far. I mean, again, all of these are with the caveat that it's been like 3 games, so you can't really read anything into it at this point. But Nick Solak has, in 2 games, 6 plate appearances, has a 500 batting average, slugging 1,000, OPS of 1,500. So that's nice. Has a home run in his 2 games. And was not a cheapie, though. Was not super wind dated, but he hit the absolute crap out of it. So, again, early returns, 2 games. I'll have another one about an hour after I'm recording this, maybe right as I'm uploading this. But this guy really needs to hit, or his future with the Rangers could be in severe question. Another guy who is on the fence in his future with the Rangers, which I didn't think would be the case going in. A guy who everyone loves, it's Jose Trevino. And he's kind of a tandem, because both of these guys really need to have a good spring training, or one of them is going to be optioned, and the other one is Jonah Heim. Both of them last year combined to be, it doesn't bring me any joy to say that, they were the worst offensive catching duo in the majors. There was just no sugarcoating it. They were pretty solid defensively. They did a really good job, and Trevino has always profiled as a backup guy. They're not who you want starting on a team that is competing for the playoffs, because their offense is just a liability. Last year, Jose Trevino had an OPS of 607, an OPS plus of 67. So even for catchers, he was still really, really far down there. And Jonah Heim, for all the hype of, he hits for a lot more power. Oh my gosh, he's so much better offensively. And, I think Trevino has a pretty clear upgrade over him defensively and in terms of compatibility with the staff, because he's been here a little bit longer and he is a little bit older, just a couple years older. Trevino's going to be 29 this year. Heim is going to be 27. And Heim did hit 10 home runs last year to Trevino's 5, but he had a 9-point lower OPS last year. He just could not get on base. And I think Grant and I talked about it yesterday's episode. His at-bats didn't look that bad. He didn't look completely overmatched, but the numbers, every time you look at him, were just staggeringly bad. He had an on-base of 239, batting average under 200. Like, it was just bad. It was really rough to watch. But I think because he's got options, he's going to start the year in AAA. I mean, the guy just needs to hit. He just straight up needs to hit, or he's going to lose out on his roster spot to Jose Trevino. I think Jose might have an option or 2 left. I'm not, maybe just 1 option. I don't think he has 2 options, but he might have 1 option year left. But I do think that the competition is going to go more to Trevino. But it's close. It's a real toss-up at this point. And if the new hitting staff can kind of teach him to Jonah Heim to hit a little bit better and realize more of his offensive potential, then he could knock Jose out of a roster spot, and Jose could be in the minors this year. And that would be really rough and a real bummer, because, I mean, both these guys, I like both these guys. But again, they were just very poor offensively last year, and there's no doubt that the Mitch Garver upgrade is a very huge upgrade, about the biggest upgrade they can make at one position offensively last year, unless you count Leody Taveras as the starting center fielder, which I don't think I do, and I don't think that Baseball Reference does for what the Rangers did last year. No, it has Adalis as the starting offensive center fielder. So there really wasn't a much bigger place that they could upgrade realistically. And even this didn't seem realistic at the time. It was like, why is this guy available? But we talked about all the reasons there in episodes last week and earlier this week. Really great offense upgrade. But again, Jose Trevino is going to be in a real stiff competition with Jonah Heim to see if that bat can get up to passable. I mean, that's even bad for a backup catcher. And they're going to be both. They're probably both going to be playing quite a few games, especially. I don't think either one is going to be released because, again, Mitch Garver has the health issues. He has had some health issues for the last couple of years, and that back injury is a real question mark. So you want to have both those guys because you're probably going to need to have 3 catchers that are right around there, or 2 backup catchers to Mitch Garver with, his history of health issues. Hopefully, you just have them there as a precaution, but you still want to be sure to have both those guys there. So, yeah, those are the 2 guys whose future is most in question. But another guy who really needs to have it, and his future might be starting to come into question, is Leody Taveras. Which I hate saying this because it's been said a bazillion times, and he is just 23. It's staggering. This is the guy who prospect fatigue has, I believe, hit the hardest. And last year was just absolutely brutal for him at the major league level. He came up and was absolutely horrendous. Went back down to AAA and had a pretty solid AAA season, an 818 OPS. I mean, he just could not hit for crap to save his life at the major league level. It just was not going well for him. It wasn't that he was completely overmatched, but towards when they came back in the back half of the season, when he made that, reintroduction to the major leagues, he really just looked crazily overmatched. A little bit of it to start was, I think, bad luck. Not just, I'm completely outmatched, I cannot hit against big league pitching. But, I mean, he did well against pitching in AAA, and we all know how great his defense is, but it's starting to get to the point where his ability to be a starter is going to be in question. He had 17 home runs last year in those 87 games at AAA, but at the big league level, it was just incredibly rough for him offensively. A 477 OPS last year. If he can get back to the 700-ish OPS that he had in 33 games in 2020, that's a really valuable starting caliber player. It lets you move Adolis Garcia over to right field. And then you have a really, really good defensive outfield. And with no matter who you have in left field, whether it's Brad Miller, whether it's Cole Calhoun, or whether it's Nick Solak, or some other guy that ends up playing there. But having Leody's incredible defense in center field and Adolis, who is Gold Glove caliber, should have been a Gold Glove finalist at the very least last year, but he played too many different positions, which weirdly hurt him in right field. That's one of the best defensive outfields in all of baseball. So that would be really, really nice to see him get on track. He doesn't have a hit in 6 at-bats or plate appearances so far. Doesn't have a walk either. But again, it's 6 plate appearances. But he really does need to hit well this year. I think he's going to start the season in AAA. I haven't seen him make the roster on a lot of the beat writers' beginning of the season roster projections. So he's going to probably start the season again in AAA. They don't want to completely overwhelm him. But depending on how he looks, if he looks solid against actual big leaguers in spring training, I wouldn't be surprised if he made the opening day roster. But if he doesn't crack a starting spot by the end of this year, I'm not sure that he ever will with the Texas Rangers. And that is going to be a real bummer for a guy who's had a lot of hype and has a incredibly valuable skill of being one of the best defensive center fielders in all of baseball. So those are my 5 guys that I think need to have the biggest spring trainings: Spencer Howard, Nick Solak, Jose Trevino, Matt Carpenter, and Leody Taveras. If you think there's some guy that I'm missing or some guy that I am not thinking of, I mean, I'm sure there's a couple of relievers, but I mean, none of the guys who are, kind of core. Even Matt Carpenter was kind of fringy. I was kind of reaching at straws there. But those top 4 guys of Howard, Solak, Trevino, and Taveras, it's going to be really important for them to do well. I mean, I think Howard the least so of all these guys, because even if he does poorly, they're probably going to start him in AAA. But the early returns on him have been very good, just in terms of him getting his head right, getting his plan of action right of what he needs to do this season, because he is a huge, huge question mark in the future of the Rangers and how quickly they can get to contention. Obviously, this starting rotation right now is not ideal, but there's a lot of guys that have some pretty solid upside that are quickly on the way. I don't think Martin Perez is going to be a long-term stopgap. I think Dane Dunning's time in the top 3 of this rotation might be numbered. but he's going to be a part of this rotation for the long term. Same with John Gray. But, Cole Winn is knocking on the door. Jack Leiter, even though he hasn't pitched a regular season professional game yet, is knocking on the door, which is kind of wild and exciting to see. And Spencer Howard has potential to be almost as good as any of them. It's just a huge question mark of is he going to actually be a starter, or is he just going to end up being a long-term multi-inning bullpen role? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but I'm excited to find out this season, and I'm excited to watch this opening day in 2 weeks' time. I cannot wait for the first Rangers game of the season to see these guys doing real things for the Rangers in a Rangers uniform. Now, this has been your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, go ahead and check out Paul Francis Sullivan on Locked On MLB. Please call him Sully. He brings you his unique perspective on the major leagues, past and present. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast. On tomorrow's episode, I'm going to be breaking down my very first opening day roster projection, all 28 spots, which I don't know if that helps me or hurts me in giving me more options to choose from. I'm going to be a really deep bullpen for the first month of the season. In case you didn't know, the Rangers and all of Major League Baseball are going to have a 28-man opening day roster for the first month until May 1st, and I believe it goes back down to 26 at that point, but I'm not entirely sure about that once it comes May 1st. Well, I'll get you informed by the time I get to May 1st, but that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Rangers. Thank you guys so much for listening, and until next time, don't forget to enjoy baseball.